Welcome back. You're watching Gravitas. Now, India is awash with speculation. Are US President Donald Trump's moves against illegal immigrants in the US likely to target Indians? And what about his proposed H-1B visa legislation? Is that part of his strategy against immigrants on the whole? Ever since the new US president took office on the promise of America First to thousands of jobless Americans whose companies had moved operations overseas, and also criticized the H-1B visa that allows IT companies in the US to import highly skilled Indian IT workers from India, there's been confusion over President Trump's multitude of actions against foreigners. WION's senior international correspondent Padma Rao explains why any new legislation may well be turned into an opportunity both for President Trump's America First as well as Prime Minister Modi's Make in India.
Just who is an illegal immigrant in the United States of America? And how will US President Donald Trump stand on the H-1B, a visa that has allowed American companies to import high-skilled workers, affect Indians? Anxiety has been mounting in India, but also among students already at US universities and hoping to stay on. Confused Indians are asking themselves, will we be considered visa violators at some later stage and deported? It's time to clear the clouds over both subjects of burning importance. Estimate of illegal immigrants in the United States, 14 million. Origins, 52% from Mexico, 15% from Central America, 12% from Asia. Most illegal residents in the United States are from countries in its immediate neighborhood. For Indians, that's the good news. But the bad, that among the 12% from Asia, Indians are the fastest growing group. But that's about overstaying visas of all kinds, not merely the H-1B. To understand President Trump's moves against the H-1B, though, let's look at the difference between outsourcing and offshoring. While US companies Amazon and others applied for the lion's share of H-1B visas to bring in Indian workers, Indian companies in the States accounted for only 13%. This is when US companies shut shop in the United States and set up elsewhere, like in China or Mexico, which offer lower costs, tax breaks and attractive incentives. This has caused the loss of American jobs within the United States. Goods made overseas by US companies are sold cheaply and primarily to the very Americans who lost their jobs when their company moved offshore. Outsourcing jobs to uniquely skilled foreign workers, though, has held a different benefit for the United States. Through such employees, many US companies have expanded operations into the countries of their origin. This could be India's argument and India's strength. Make in India by all means, but also make for India and through India for the world. Padma Rao, WION.
To discuss Trump's latest act, we are now joined in the studio by Pramith Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of Hindustan Times newspaper. We also have TV Mohandas Pai, chairman Manipal Global Education. And also joining us live from the United States is Michael Kugelman, Deputy Director, Asia Program and South Asia Senior Associate at the Wilson Center. Thank you all for joining us tonight on Gravitas. Coming to you, Michael, first. Give us a sense of how the American people and industry are reacting to all of it, and how might this impact America's relations with other countries going forward, especially India and elsewhere around the world?
Well, I think the word to describe the view here in America about all this is divided. There's a tremendous amount of controversy surrounding Trump's immigration policy, and particularly in terms of giving state and local authorities more power to essentially go after those that are here illegally. And I would argue that it's a very different view here in the United States about that, about what Trump wants to do about illegal immigrants versus what he wants to do about the H-1B visa program. There actually is a fair amount of support, including bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for scaling back, if not eliminating, the H-1B visa program. But it's a totally different story with the issue of dealing with undocumented workers and illegal immigrants. So I could imagine some lawsuits, I could imagine, quite frankly, some delays. That could take a while until it gets to where Trump would like it to be. In terms of what this means for relations with other countries, I mean, certainly, if you look at the U.S.-India relationship, I would argue that if Trump does indeed rein in or try to dismantle the H-1B visa program, that could have some implications for the U.S.-India relationship. I would argue that in this particular case, this is a relationship that's invested with so much goodwill that I think that it would be more, the H-1B visa issue would be more of an irritant than a major tension in the relationship. But if you look at U.S. Relationships with other countries in the world, it could be a very different story, particularly those countries that the U.S. has had some issues with, whether you're talking about Mexico or other countries around the world. So I think we're lucky in the U.S.-India context that there could be issues here, there could be some irritants, but I think that the relationship will survive and will continue to flourish, even if Trump does follow through with all of these things he says he's going to do with immigration and H-1B visa issues.
All right, Michael, I'll ask you to stay on while I quickly go across to Mr. Mohandas Pai. Mr. Pai, Prime Minister Modi yesterday urged the United States to keep an open mind on admitting skilled Indian workers. Now, his comments were addressed to a visiting bipartisan congressional delegation from the U.S. Now, do the Prime Minister's remarks reflect more of a concern that India's $150 billion IT services industry will suffer, or is it a veiled warning that Silicon Valley itself will also suffer?
No, I think it's a request that you make when you deal with, heads of government. Prime Minister Modi is making a request on behalf of India that please take a considered decision. Indian IT has been a force multiplier for American companies. A large part of the global competitiveness has been because of the IT system, which are managed by Indian companies. I, for one, don't see what Trump is doing as a very serious threat. I spoke to an American analyst who had come down to Mumbai for a meet, and he told me that Indians are getting worked up, the media is whipping up an unnecessary debate about what is going to happen about H-1B. He said it's not going to happen. And one senior legislator from America, congressman, has said there need to be no fear on all these matters. President Trump is looking at manufacturing and not something in IT, because IT has very low unemployment and American companies need Indian IT.
Right. There's a school of thought, Mr. Pai, that feels that Indians should focus on diversifying to other countries and not just obsess with only the US as a favored destination for Indian software professionals. Your comment, Mr. Pai?
No, diversification has been there for a long period of time, and I think people who make such comments don't understand what the industry is all about. 60% of Indian IT is with America, and America's GDP is about $18 trillion. Europe is $18 trillion, but the addressable market there is much smaller. And Japan is $5 trillion, but they don't allow anybody to come in. So what else is left? The US is the biggest market in the world, the foremost market. And if some commentators and other media think that they know business strategy and these companies do not know business, that they must be joking. All companies diversify, they do everything, they know what to do. I think we should let them alone and not go on badgering them with unnecessary fears, whipping up passion against something where they don't see any threat.
Right. Also, Mr. Pai, would you agree that the H-1B visa itself is far from perfect, that it has indeed allowed US firms to import low-end software workers as programmers to save on labor costs? What are the other imperfections in the existing H-1B visas which could be improved in such a way that it becomes a win-win for both the US and Trump's idea, as well as Mr. Modi's idea of Make in India and countries such as India?
Indian IT does project-based work. Project-based work requires you to travel. It's like an American lawyer coming to India and doing work for Indian companies who want to access the American markets, either for finance or for capital or whatever. And when you do that, they travel to and fro. Except in IT, you travel there, you have to sit down for certain times. And when you write the specs and go back to India, write the code and go back to install it, you need to spend some time to install it and to maintain it and then hand over back offshore. So I think we need to be careful. We need to understand H-1B. It is not an immigration visa. It is not that people are coming there and staying away and taking jobs. These are all projects that are happening. And for projects to complete, you need people to travel to and fro. Let's not forget, American companies registered in America, employ 1 million people in India. And these are not people who are coming because they're cheap and the low cost. They are paid comparable wages, comparable to the wages paid in America. And under H-1B regulations, unless you pay a cutoff of $60,000, you're supposed to have notification and find out local workers. And if you notify local workers, they will have to apply. You have to look after them. Now, all these things are very stringent. There could be some abuses. for some 5-10%. But the abuse doesn't mean Indian companies are abusing. They have great reputation to keep. And I think we must stop this bashing, stop this fear-mongering, which is going on in a very uninformed way by people who just do not know what they're talking.
All right, on that note, I want to thank you, Mr. Pai, for sharing your thoughts with me on Gravitas. Now, coming to you, Pramith, we heard Trump talk about America first and also that buy American and hire American. Yeah. In India, we heard Prime Minister Modi talk about make in India. Now, given their respective statements and positions, would you describe it as a strategic dissonance or strategic discordance?
Well, first, every government that comes to power will automatically say they would prefer that jobs be created at home. Right. That's politically just a sensible thing to say. The real issue, I think, with America is that Trump wants to revive manufacturing, but there isn't very much left in manufacturing in the United States. But America, why don't they have manufacturing? Because the labor costs are so high, and their regulatory costs are high. So automation has destroyed 80% of the manufacturing jobs in the United States in the past 25 years. In India, labor costs are still cheap. In fact, China, for example, is now having a problem. Their labor costs are simply so high that factories are leaving China and going to places like Bangladesh. Modi's opportunity is much stronger than Trump's because India is actually competitive on the labor side. It's not competitive, unfortunately, on the infrastructure side, which is what he's trying to compensate for. So a lot of countries like India are looking at China, and as watching the manufacturing sector in China start to sink or disappear, they're saying, can these jobs come to my country? Bangladesh, Vietnam have done very well. India is still lagging, partly because our infrastructure is poor and our regulatory system continues to be a problem. But for Modi, that opportunity is there. He realizes it. But in every country in the world, automation is still the #1 problem or threat to job creation.
All right, fair enough. Let's, before I go back to Michael, let's now look at the timeline of the Trump travel ban and the aftermath. Now, on January 27, President Trump signs the executive order banning entry of citizens from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen for 90 days. The next day, 28 January, protests break out across the U.S. New York judge stays the order. The following day, restraining order by Massachusetts court. Trump defends the order. And on January 30, the former President Barack Obama criticizes the order. The Senate Republicans block attempt to reverse the order. Trump fires acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Come February 2, the Trump administration eases travel ban restrictions for green card holders. February 3, court temporarily halts key provisions of the order. February 9, court rules against reinstating the travel ban founded on unconstitutional religious bias. And on February 20, Trump's revised immigration order expected to renew the ban on 7 Muslim-majority countries. So that was the timeline of the events of the past few weeks. Now, going back to you, Michael, I want to ask you a question point blank. I mean, as I was asking Pramith here, Mr. Trump has spoken about America first and buy American and hire American. Not so long ago, we heard another gentleman by the name of Barack Obama say the following words, and I quote, "Say no to Bangalore and yes to Buffalo." So I'm just wondering what's the difference in the semantics here. Weren't they both talking about the same issues in 2009 when Obama was talking about the economic priorities of his government, and now with Mr. Trump talking about America first, manufacturing, and so on, as Pramith was mentioning here? Michael?
Well, I think that the Trump administration has really not spelled out specifically what America first means. Quite frankly, a lot of us simply don't know, and how that's supposed to relate to foreign policy. And that's another big question that we're all trying to figure out. You talk about the travel ban, which is indeed going to be reinstated. I think it's a terrible and an embarrassing policy, and that clearly is meant to reflect what Trump would think is an America first policy, in the sense that you need to focus on national security and ensure that Americans are safe and that you don't have any terrorists coming into the country. But, as vast majorities of the American population would argue, that simply is not the case. In fact, he may probably make America less safe by banning people from 7 Muslim countries from coming to the United States, because it would provide propaganda talking points to terrorists that will just make a lot of people very angry. And of course, as we know, there have not been anyone. There's never been anyone in the United States from any of those 7 countries that staged a terrorist attack here. So I think that the semantics are a bit tricky. America first. What does it really mean? My own sense is that it's easier to talk about what it means in domestic context, focusing on American jobs, than it does focusing in an overseas.
But Michael, I'm sorry to intervene there. Weren't both leaders talking about similar issues, if not the same issues? Obama was talking about the economy, about tax issues, about jobs being outsourced to countries such as India, which is why the reference to Bangalore. And here we have Trump talking about, again, jobs, manufacturing, and so on. So the emphasis may be slightly different, but I guess, won't you agree that both leaders are coming from more or less the same place?
Oh, absolutely, I would agree. And, to repeat what one of your other guests said earlier, it makes good political sense for an American leader, particularly a new leader, to be focusing on creating American jobs. I mean, that's one of the essential political objectives when it comes to someone in leadership, or at least it should be, is to make sure that American jobs are protected. So in that regard, yeah, it's not surprising that, the quote you cited before from Obama, it really sounds very similar to the type of theme that Trump sounds. So I would argue that there's a much harder edge to the way in which Trump makes this argument compared to the way in which Obama makes it.
All right, Michael, please stay on. I want to bring Pramith back into the discussion. Pramith, I want to take a moment or two to draw your attention to another world leader, Theresa May, who was in India not so long ago.
Yes.
And there again, we saw the same emphasis on mobility issues.
Yes.
And if I can just quote you what she had to say, and I quote here, "The UK will consider further improvements to our visa offer if, at the same time, we can step up the speed and volume of returns of Indians with no rights to remain in the UK." Now, she was trying to make an offer, as it were, to India, saying, okay, you take back those illegals, as it were, and we'll try to visit some of those issues. But India clearly did not, take up on her offer. So is that something, do you see a parallel or similarity between the two issues? I mean, on the one hand, Trump and the US and H-1B visa issues, and the same issues with India and the UK. Students, professionals, including nurses and doctors and IT workers, skilled workers. So is it, as the Americans say, we've seen this movie before?
Well, yes. Well, Theresa May's offer is actually not much of an offer. The number of legal Indians who are allowed to become UK citizens now is down to just a few thousand a year. So that's really not an offer at all. In fact, it's less than 10,000 a year. And so what she's really saying, and the number of illegals is actually quite small as well. Both in America and Britain, illegal Indian migration is relatively small. What there is a group of Indians in between who are, as you mentioned, students, temporary work visas, who are looking for a path to become citizens after a period of time.
Right.
And so in effect, she's saying, I'm going to cut that off and you take those back. But then the Indian side, I think, correctly said, well, that leaves nothing, because 10,000 or so less Indians coming in, largely on family reunion visas, is not an offer. Right. And remember, the India-European Union free trade agreement talks have been largely, not completely, but largely been paralyzed over one issue, which was the issue of temporary work visas for Indians going to Europe. And Britain was the single largest obstacle. It was said that we don't want to have Indians coming in. So now that Britain leaves the European Union and then says, now we want a free trade agreement with India, India is going to say, rightly, then, well, Mode 4 services, as it's called in economics, is right back on the top of the agenda. And Britain, if I read May's argument, will not give anything, in which case there's no basis for an FTA between the two countries.
All right, we'll continue the discussion. But before that, I want to quickly go across to our next segment, which about the reaction. Now, what do the people whose parents have been immigrants to the country think about the Trump ban? Let's listen to a couple of reactions from New York.
For me, what's upsetting is that my father and so many others like my father were given the opportunity to build a life here. They were entrusted to become part of the system. They were allowed to climb the bureaucratic ladders to enter American companies. They were trusted. Why? Because they were European? I don't understand. And And what's upsetting is to see that now so many people are being rid of this opportunity, I think because of where they come from. I would describe Trump's immigration policies as a milder form of psychological warfare. It's very sad to see what's happening to this country. It's only been, 33 days. It's incredibly divided. I mean, just in the last few weeks, you've had attacks on Muslims, on Jews, on South Americans, including Mexicans, that have come to this country to create a better life for themselves. So it's really disappointing to see that there are so many Americans that are backing up this xenophobic rhetoric. I personally come from an immigrant family. My parents are Greek.
Right, there we heard some reactions, Pramit. Now, just to be the devil's advocate here, now, what Trump is essentially saying is he's focusing on the illegals, people who are illegally entering the U.S. And to be fair to his new guidelines, and I quote an Associated Press report here, the Trump administration is expanding the number of people in the U.S. illegally who are considered a priority for deportation, including people arrested for traffic violations, according to documents released on Tuesday. Don't you think it's fair on his part, at least, to be trying to prevent the illegals? I mean, he's not talking about stopping all and sundry from entering the U.S., unlike the last time when he talked about a blanket ban on immigrants. Here he's taking a very calibrated, measured tone, at least on the face of it. There again, just to point out to you, in Europe, for instance, we saw many governments across the European mainland on the issue of refugees from Syria and other parts of North Africa. Suddenly the border controls went up. The Schengen just got lost somewhere in the process. So why demonize Trump, as Foreign Secretary Jaishankar said not so long ago? Why don't we analyze him and try to understand where he's coming from?
No, I don't disagree. I think that there's a very clear, and all the polling evidence indicates that a vast majority of Americans, when asked, do you support immigration? They say yes. When you say, do you support find that the Obama administration, in its 8 years, expelled 6 million illegal migrants, the greatest number in any administration in U.S. history. So that policy has already been in place to some degree. Trump has, as you said, expanded the basis for expulsion to make it a little easier for them to be expelled. And the problem that you'll face is a degree of harassment that you may see, that a policeman at the lower end coming after somebody who's just had a traffic violation and so on. The harassment issue is going to be the difficult part. But yes, I don't think that I think across the board, every country is now saying that legal migration is fine, illegal migration is a problem. The point that where Trump is really being attacked is the issue of that he's trying to restrict, or at least talking about restricting, even legal migration, right? That there are bills now that would cut even the famous 1965 Legal Migration Acts, which are the basis for most of the migration that comes into the United States.
So, in your estimation, what's the way forward for Indian government and industry? Would it be adapt or perish?
Well, I think what the Indian government is doing on the diplomatic front, from what I've heard, they've already launched a sort of back-channel diplomatic move to slowly lobby they realize that confronting Trump directly is a bad thing to do. He tends to take these personally. It's better to work it indirectly. Second, in the U.S. Congress, there's a lot of support for the Indian position. Even the Republican Party is actually a pro-immigration party, and the mainstream Republicans are generally supportive, and American industry is supportive. So you slowly work on that issue. If he focuses on illegal migration, that's fine. As I said, Indians are very few, only a few 100,000 fall into that category. So that's one thing the Indian government is doing. The second issue, I think, is to try to preserve, in the broader picture, is that it's often forgotten now, Indians are now the single largest flow of legal migrants into the United States. We've overtaken the Mexicans, we've overtaken the Chinese. It's built an amazing relationship. In barely about 10 years now, almost 4 million Indians are now in the United States.
And very quickly, Pramit, you mentioned, you used the word lobby. Now, what can India do on Capitol Hill? I mean, we have heard about lobbyists and lobbying in the past. So is there scope at all for India to act now?
Oh, yes. I think it's already happening. We saw the congressional delegation was in town, and across the board they were told, look at H-1B visas again, look at the migration story between us. And in the U.S. Congress, we're already working our way through, bit by bit, working our way through each of the congressmen. Because ultimately, it's Congress that has to pass the bill.
All right, fair enough. On that note, Pramith, I want to thank you and Michael, who joined us on Skype not so long ago. On that note, thank you for your gentlemen for your thoughts. That's all we have on this edition of Gravitas. News and updates continue on the other side of a short break. Stay tuned to WION.